Welcome, welcome. My name is Lloyd Borrell. I'm your host. Today, I'm thrilled to have as my guest Dr. J. Davidson. Dr. Davidson received his doctorate of chiropractic degree at Northwestern College of Chiropractic in Minnesota. He is an ambitious researcher and clinician in the health world and 2 times #1 international best-selling author. He's well known for his at-home Lyme disease program that walks you through his exact protocols that changed his wife's life from a near-death experience with Lyme disease. Dr. J. Davidson, welcome to the EMF Health Summit.
I am excited to be here. Lloyd, I think this is an amazing topic and so important for the public to know. So I'm super excited to be a speaker on it.
I'm thrilled that you're here today. Really, truly, I'm thrilled. So let's start at the beginning, or what I see at the beginning anyway. Let's start somewhere. But, the World Health Organization recognizes chronic disease as the leading cause of disability and death in the world. So I'd like to start just by asking you, what is chronic disease, and then if we could lead into to what extent does chronic disease and electromagnetic fields go together?
Yeah, that's a great question. So chronic disease, I look at it as basically it's lifestyle. It's what we've done that's created it. And right now we're in a very interesting time where there's more chemical toxins than ever before. There's more what seems like EMF, EMR, or some people call EMI than ever before, and yet we're becoming sicker than ever before. And it's like there's this coming together of this bombardment of stressors that's happening to us right now that's really pushing us over the edge, that's creating all kinds of autoimmune type conditions, that's making all kinds of pathogen type conditions like Lyme disease more prevalent, and conditions like autism, right, are skyrocketing. I really believe it's this collective stressor that's hitting us, chemical. I love to call the EMF, EMR side of it digital toxicity. The digital toxins are hitting us. And then just lifestyle stressors too, that we're burning the candle at both ends. We have technology all over the place. We can never, detach or really like wind down, or, scrolling Facebook, scrolling Twitter. We're constantly checking emails, and we're in a very interesting place that's created us to have cancer rates very high, heart disease very high, diabetes very high. And these are lifestyle diseases, and up and coming, up in that top 3, top 4, Alzheimer's, dementia type conditions with the brain, and just the direction we're moving. It's very clear that we need to, was it Mark Twain? When you find yourself on the side of majority, it's time to pause, reflect, and basically go the other direction. And I feel like that's what we need to do as well too.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, pause, reflect, and go in the other direction. Certainly, I think that's something which is increasingly hard to do for so many people in today's world. Is just pause and reflect, because as you say, we're just bombarded by information, really, I guess, but certainly electromagnetic fields as well. But so let's talk about just explore that a little bit more then, if we can, because I know you've researched EMFs and health quite extensively. Can you tell us, can you try and explain in simple terms, what science tells us about how EMFs impact our health, in terms of the biological effects and the symptoms?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, because, what is available for us science-wise and what we know, what's available like on PubMed isn't everything that's available. That I really feel as if the electrical communication, cell phone, Wi-Fi, all that whole industry, and you would have better terminology than I do for that, but that whole industry, I feel like, has a ton of power. And they don't want to be publishing research looking at 5G. They don't want to be looking at the effect of these different, gigahertz type Wi-Fi, frequencies. They don't want to look at the different, types of Bluetooth that are being released, the faster and faster but shorter distance. And I mean, it's kind of what we're running into 5G. And I get really worried, when I look at a protocol, because my main world is Lyme disease. My wife almost died of it. After my daughter was born, my daughter's 6 now at this time. So it's been kind of a whirlwind to get her optimally healthy. And then of course, me working with clients and my doctors, and then we have like an at-home program that we walk people through. But as I analyze it, what I realize is so much focus goes into killing Lyme disease. It's all about killing the bug. And the focus needs to shift and say, okay, well, what are all the stressors that we're dealing with today? And then how do we minimize those? And one of those, which is why I'm so excited to be on this summit, Lloyd, is EMR, electromagnetic radiation. Some people call it electromagnetic fields or frequencies, EMFs. And then Dr. Jared Bergman on my last Lyme disease summit, he liked to call it EMI, electromagnetic interference. It's like, what are the electromagnetic, waves that are actually interfering with your body? And I think that topic is super important because, when you look at some of the forefront people in the health world, like Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, he basically says that, when you have excessive exposure of, microwaves or frequencies, EMR, it's basically, if you have heavy metal toxicity, those heavy metals are amplifying it. If you have pathogens or even just the good bugs in your body, it's making them turn bad. It's making them aggressive. So where maybe they were, kind of in a peaceful environment and everything was okay, you put those kind of stressors in and it can actually change the internal environment. So, I've seen in my own clinical practice, I've seen people with massive sleep issues. And it's like, we'll take, liposome melatonin. Let's make sure, we establish a routine, minimize the blue light, all these different things. And then find out they have a Wi-Fi router right next to their head at the bed. And it's like, we should have started there. We should like you can't out supplement a bad lifestyle, and EMF I feel like is part of that.
Yeah. So you just made reference to your wife, and I know that must have been pretty traumatic experience for both of you. So she had this near-death experience, as I understand it, with Lyme disease. So perhaps, because Lyme disease is, I've heard all kinds of things about Lyme disease, about, what it is and what it isn't, but perhaps we could just talk about that, because to me, there seems to be some kind of crossover between certainly what we call electro-hypersensitivity, or we've got another name for it now, electromagnetic field intolerance syndrome, and Lyme disease. And there's a lot of confusion about these different conditions. So could you just explain what is Lyme disease, and perhaps address a question of someone who's listening, how would they know if they've got Lyme disease?
Yeah, a great question. So all your questions are great, Lloyd. So Lyme disease it's a bacteria. So it's a bacterial disease, if you will. It's a little challenging to not think of it as a disease because the name is Lyme disease. The L is capitalized in Lyme because it's a proper name. But it's basically a bacteria, and it's a bacteria that can modify and morph and change and hide. It's got more ability to really evade the immune system than most bugs. So that's why it really is top of the list as far as pathogens, especially in the bacteria side of, like, this is a bad bug. And they call it a spirochete, and all that means is it's like a spiral like a corkscrew type shape. So it doesn't like to float around in the blood, which is why most of the Lyme disease tests are inaccurate, because they're looking at the blood. And when you understand, well, Lyme disease, the target organ is not the bloodstream, then the chance of actually catching that in the bloodstream, doing a blood test, not very likely. So what we know is that corkscrew, that spiral shape, loves to drill into tissues. It loves to go into joints. It likes to go into organs. And probably one of the classic signs of chronic Lyme disease, and the reason I say chronic, acute means you just got it, it's within 6 to 8 weeks, and then you can treat it. Some people prefer antibiotics, and that's kind of, I would say, if you do antibiotics, that would be maybe that one-time thing is for an acute exposure. But most times when people actually get Lyme disease, they'll actually get it reactivated, like it's already in their body. And I would put most cases of Lyme disease in the chronic side, because even if all of a sudden you exhibit a symptom, it doesn't mean that you just got it for the first time. It could also mean that it's reactivating, or something triggered it to really flare up. And then that would be in the chronic side. And the chronic side is a tougher camp to deal with. if you would ask practitioners, hey, would you rather work with stage 4 cancer or chronic Lyme disease? Majority of them, I believe, would probably push into the cancer because it's a little bit more predictable. Lyme disease, chronic Lyme disease, is very up in the air because there's over 150 different symptoms, which means it can mimic a lot of different things. A lot of times, people are ruling every other condition and disease out, and then they're like, well, it must be Lyme disease. And that's how they come up with the diagnosis. But there's a couple classic things that I've seen. If you've been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition like chronic fatigue syndrome, or I should say chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, or an autoimmune condition like lupus, RA, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, SLE, something like that, then I would say, okay, we need to rule out Lyme disease. That it doesn't mean it's automatic that you have it, but there's a high likelihood that you do. And if you do have it, then we need to identify that, because that's got to be part of the protocol. And the key is, if you find out you have Lyme disease, it's not everything's Lyme disease. The key is we have to look at everything, including EMR. We have to look at environmental mold. We have to look at drainage pathways and making sure that people can actually, if they start detoxing or killing pathogens, that these things can flow out. And a simple example would be constipation. So if you're not pooping or going number 2 very easily or regularly, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm going to go kill a bunch of bugs, or I'm going to go detox, heavy metals out of my body. Really, those pathways are clogged, which means that stuff can't move. Inflammation increases, you feel worse, and then you're like, oh, I can't do this. So there's definitely a very specific order that we want to address, in the protocol. And EMFs have to be earlier on, because they really seem to magnify mold. They seem to magnify heavy metal toxicity, because I feel like the heavy metals are a conductor of the EMR, and then also the EMR side will also make good bugs turn bad, or make them go rogue. So when you're looking at the order, EMR has to be addressed earlier on. In Lyme disease, probably a classic symptom would be moving arthritis. So what that would look like, Lloyd, is, today you've got shoulder pain, and then now tomorrow it's my hip, and then the next day, it's my knee, but now the other ones feel fine. That's what I would call moving arthritis, where it's popping around in different areas. That's a pretty classic Lyme disease type symptom. Yeah. If you have soreness on your sternum, let's see if I can. So like right where your ribs come into your sternum and you press on there. Well, when you press on there, and if you're like, whoa, that is tender, that's a pretty classic sign of Lyme disease. If you have, this might be mirrored on my screen, but this is my right AC joint. Mm-hmm. If that's tender when you push on that, or if you have problems but you haven't had any physical injury, that could be a sign of Lyme disease. So there's different physical things, but the issue is there's 150 different symptoms, and somebody could have 4 of them and somebody else could have 20 of them, and they could be completely different, and you're like, wait a minute, this isn't matching up exactly. So Lyme disease, unfortunately, usually gets ruled out at the end, but it's something that we want to consider earlier on, because it is really a big epidemic worldwide, not just in the northeast of the United States, not just in the Midwest of the United States. There's people that say it really started over in Europe, in the late 1800s. So we know it's a worldwide epidemic. The only continent that it has not been found on is Antarctica. So, which, I don't know many people that live there anyways, where they could find it, but that's just something to consider in the Lyme disease world.
And this is a massive problem, and there's something that I only learned about, yesterday actually, when I was researching this interview, is there's like over 300,000 new cases a year. So it is a big, it's, I don't think we can use perhaps the word epidemic, but it is a big issue. It is a big health issue of our day. But the question I have is just really, so Lyme disease, is this whole thing about ticks and tick bites, is that what starts it? What actually starts Lyme disease?
Yeah, and this is where you're not going to get a straight answer out of me, because I've done multiple chronic Lyme disease summits and interviewed experts, and getting their opinion and what's working and things. And I mean, I've one of the experts I interviewed said it was really a conflict resolution of a family member that triggers Lyme disease. And I was like, wow, this isn't even talking about like a tick, a tick bite, which is technically a tick sting. So classically, the CDC, their newest stats say 300,000 people are affected or basically contracted each year in the United States and their previous stat was 30,000. So they 10x the number. A lot of Lyme experts would say that that number is 10x 300,000 and, more like 3 million. So we know that it's a factor in a lot of different cases. Now, the question is it the only factor? No, because if it was the only factor, then that's where people could just bombard their body with antibiotics, throw the nuclear bomb on. It's like we annihilate all the bacteria and you're going to be well. But we know so many people, even when they go on long-term antibiotics, anytime they stop it, they rebound and they have side effects and they don't feel good and they get, symptoms reemerging from Lyme because the different protective layers or the different shields that Lyme uses weren't dealt with. And this is where EMR fits in. This is where heavy metals, mold, parasites is a huge thing that we can talk about as well. But coming back to it, Lyme disease, the CDC states that ticks carry Lyme disease. When you get stung, people always say bite, but when you get stung by a tick, they can transmit it. And it's got to be, attached for more than 24 hours at least. And we know all that's basically false because the studies that were done with the ticks, where they go on and they attach to the skin, the research was on animals. Well, animals with long fur or hair, so they had to travel to the hair to get to the skin. Humans, and I know there's some humans that are hairy than others, but for the most part, it's not like you have that much hair, on your skin where a tick attached, boom, it's in. And we know cases, where it's at most 8 hours where the tick was attached and boom, a bullseye rash popped up. So tick transmission is kind of the classic mode, but very few people remember getting a tick sting or a bite, and very few people actually get the bullseye rash classically. If you get a bullseye rash and you get bit by a tick or stung by a tick, that's classic sign that's Lyme disease. But only a third of people actually get the bullseye rash. So just because you've never got a bullseye rash because you've never seen a tick doesn't mean you don't have Lyme disease. And then now if we step out of the CDC a little bit and we kind of look at what we understand, it's a spirochete. Other spirochetes, one of them is syphilis, which is a sexually transmitted disease. It's a spiral-shaped bacteria. We know that there's research showing that moms can actually pass the spirochete on to the fetus. There's research done where cows are infected. This was University of Wisconsin, that they had cows with Lyme disease. They collected the milk and the spirochete was in the milk of the cow. So, theoretically, if cows are passing it through the milk, that in my mind, I'm like, well, I could see human moms passing it on through the milk too, if if the baby doesn't get it fetus wise. But it seems as if Lyme disease is sexually transmitted. So if your spouse or, your partner or something has had it, that's a way that you can get it. So it's not just the tick bite sting, it's many modes of transmission. And when we open up and think about that, then we realize, wow, this is really a big pandemic. And I believe the CDC does say that Lyme disease is the #1 vector-borne disease, like the highest, So I would put it in the epidemic category, whether they officially categorize it as that, but I would personally say that.
So, yeah, so that's Lyme disease. So, which is obviously a growing problem, and chronic disease generally is a growing problem too. So in terms of EMF exposures and chronic disease and, dealing with chronic disease, it would be, would you agree with me that they're really, these EMFs are sort of right up there as a priority because of the essential problem is this aggressor effect, this magnifying effect. Therefore, that's why we have to take it into account and take action solutions with regard to that.
EMF has to be earlier on. If it helps, I can share my screen and kind of show you my flow chart on where EMFs or EMR fits in, if you would like that. So just sharing that. Can you see that, Lloyd?
You can see that, yeah.
Okay, so it looks a little confusing, but essentially, if you kind of look at the main flow of things through the middle of the chart where it says detect there, that's what I always say is the first step is we want to identify what are all the issues with your health, because in order to really create a roadmap, we have to understand what's going on. Then we look at drainage, and that's just making sure that the colon pathways are opened up, the liver, kidney, the bile duct, the skin that you're sweating, the lymphatic system, the glymphatic, which is the brain drainage to the lymph. We want to make sure that all those pathways are open, because anytime that we're going to jump in and kill something or detox something, it's got to have somewhere to go. And that's what drainage is for. So if you start getting symptoms, you could be doing the wrong protocol, or it just means that the drainage pathways are clogged up. The next step in the kind of the main list here with the black arrows is parasites. And the reason I've got parasites earlier on is that we know that mold spores will live inside of parasites. So let's say you're in a moldy environment, and you remedy that, or you move, you relocate in your mold, your mold safe environment. Well, your body can still have mold spores in them because they can be living inside the parasites and replicating and still making you, biotoxic illness sick or mold sick. So mold will be hidden in parasites. Heavy metals will be stored in parasites. So in order to detox, you have to clear parasites out first. Parasites are sponges for heavy metals. Parasites will carry, 6 to 8 times their weight in heavy metals. So to fully detoxify, you got to clear the parasites out, which then will allow the metals to be detoxed. The viruses and bacteria here toward the bottom right, those can actually, Dr. Alan McDonald actually showed that Lyme disease can live safely within parasites. We know that other viruses can live safely within parasites. So for somebody that's just going after, killing Lyme and they miss the other pieces, you're going to hit a wall, because heavy metals will protect Lyme, parasites will protect Lyme, parasites will obviously protect mold as well too. So that's kind of the general flow chart. But and then you'll see at the very bottom, I've kind of got what looks like bricks, like the foundation. You can see our thoughts, our mind. Emotional trauma is a really important thing. And then also the food we put in the body. So I just kind of assume that that's like a foundation to this whole, protocol that I put together. But as you go back and you look at the red arrows, environmental mold, so mold within your work building, mold within your home, that will clog up the drainage pathways. So you have to make sure that your environment is safe. The next red arrow is your world, EMR, right? Electromagnetic radiation. And the reason I put that in there is that EMRs can make good bugs go bad, or they can make them go rogue. They can amplify the reaction of heavy metals within you, because it's kind of like the electrical, we're just electrical beings anyways, but the electrical signals, the artificial, man-made electromagnetic radiation will get amplified within the heavy metal toxicity and can make that situation worse. And then it also will create, we know that EMR and mold in the same environment, the mold will produce about 600 times more mycotoxins, which is the byproduct of mold. So it's really important to make sure you're in a safe environment. It's really important to look at minimizing EMR. And the two biggest things, when I was living in San Diego and I had a building biologist, certified in EMR come in and, had the expensive meters and all that. The first thing he said, turn everything on, let's measure it. Well, he couldn't, the only thing he could detect on the stuff was Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Everything else was like muted because that was so strong. So he's like, okay, let's shut that off. Let's shut that off. And then now he could actually start identifying, okay, is there any miswiring in different spots, dirty electricity? Are there any other appliances that are kicking out, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth? So it was like the Wi-Fi router and the Bluetooth, the smart homes was so bad that you had to shut it off to really detect other stuff. So I think an easy recommendation for the listeners is we need to go to wired internet. We need to go, back to the wired, and in wired internet's more reliable. It's generally faster. It's not as sexy though, because there's cords everywhere. But in all reality, it's going to, lessen the stress on you. And just to kind of finish up this chart here, and then I'll stop sharing my screen. Amalgams are the mercury fillings in the mouth. So in order to fully detox, you got to get a source out. And then the cavitations here kind of block the pathway of clearing out the viruses and bacteria, because essentially when you have cavitations, what they are is they're infection in your jaw. So they're either the mandible or the maxilla. And the infection, just think of it as a barrier. So let's say I have a virus or a parasite or Lyme disease in my brain and I'm doing treatment. If I have an infection in my jaw in one of those locations, what'll happen is they'll create a barrier. So all the treatment will be effective down, but it's never getting up into my brain. So you'll hit a wall and you won't fully clear it out. So that's kind of where that, roadmap fits in. But as far as EMFs and EMR, I believe that it will make Lyme disease worse. Probably the easiest way I think of it, Lloyd, it's so I have a little daughter. And do you have any kids?
I do. Yeah, I got two. But
So
they're a little bit bigger now.
A little bigger.
Mostly bigger than me.
So you have your child, tugging at you like dad, 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 or poking you, right? Dad, dad, dad. You're like, oh, that's cute, right? And then a couple minutes goes by and you're like, okay, what do you need? And then 10 minutes goes by, 20 minutes, and you're like, okay, what do you need? That's how I think of EMR or Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. Is it's like, oh, your body can handle it for a little bit. But when it's constantly there stressing you out, how can you fully rebuild your adrenal glands if you have a constant stressor stressing you out? It doesn't matter what adrenal formula, what adrenal supplement, glandular, adaptogenic herb that you're taking, the adrenals are going to keep getting stressed out, and you're going to be running just this loop of like, I have to be on supplements forever because you haven't got to the cause. And EMR is one of those causes, I believe.
Mm-hmm. The chart you showed us there is great, and we can really understand it a lot better with that. And so it's what you were saying at the beginning. It's all working together. It's not just the EMFs. It's not just the parasites. It's not just the amalgams, because as you say, you reference a study which is a Klinghardt study with the mold. It's this synergy which is creating this perfect storm, which is creating this dis-ease, which is creating these symptoms, and these different diseases. So if we can talk about EMFs and solutions. So you mentioned to go wired, and it's true, it's not sexy. And it can be a real pain in the backside, particularly if you're in rented property, for instance. If you're in your own home, then you do what you want. But if you're renting, many people are, then it is a problem. But it is still feasible. Most people can, so you've got to lay wires all over the place, but an Ethernet wire, a cable, obviously. But yes, so if we can address that. Solutions generally, what you recommend, because you have various protocols, I know. So what are in your protocols in terms of dealing with electromagnetic fields or electromagnetic radiation, as you call it?
Yep. First two things: shut the Wi-Fi off, shut the Bluetooth off. And those are the most challenging things because our lifestyle is based on it. And oftentimes you'll have a couple, husband, wife, where maybe one wants to do it and the other doesn't. And then now all of a sudden you've got a battle, right? So there could be emotional challenges with this whole piece, but going through it a couple different times. So I used to live in San Diego. In our house, when he came in and checked it all over, it was like, okay, we need to figure out wired internet. So then we decided, okay, what are the most important areas of the house where we actually want to be connected to the internet? And this was actually a blessing in disguise, because you can't just like walk around and have internet everywhere you go. Like it's a dedicated, dedicated areas to actually, not get sucked into working all day or, scanning the internet or whatever, or researching. So we really decided, okay, I want one in this room. I want one in the living room, the kitchen, nothing in our bedroom. And then in my office, so we had basically four different rooms, and the TV for like the Netflix and Amazon Prime, where you can hardwire the TV. So really just thought about, okay, where do we actually want internet? And then we hired somebody to come in and run Cat6e lines that were shielded, so it didn't transmit, EMFs beyond, and then grounded the whole network. So we paid somebody to do that. And then we got rid of our Wi-Fi speakers, the Sonos, which were so cool. That's so bad for you. The good news is they have a high resale, so you can just sell them on, Craigslist or eBay or whatever. But and then he hardwired speakers in, and set that up. Now we're in a different location, and the house that we're in now, we're renting it, and it's got concrete walls, so it's not as easy to like poke holes and run cables. So what I figured out with this house is that this house, I believe, is like 15 years old, and they ran coax cable throughout the house, a couple different lines in each room. And I found there's a device on Amazon. I can actually go to my closet and grab it, but you can plug so you've got like where your modem comes in through a coax cable and plugs in. Well, you basically put this device between it, and it takes the coax and it spreads it back to the modem, and then the Ethernet cable goes back to it. And what happens is it transmits Ethernet cable throughout the coax. So you don't need to run Ethernet. You can actually utilize the coax cable. Okay. And I was like, well, this sounds like a good idea. I'm going to try it out. Plugged it in my office, plugged it in downstairs by, our TV, and it worked right away. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. You can actually get internet through a coax cable. It was the coolest thing. And it does up to 1 gigabyte per second. So it can transmit very fast. So I was super excited about that. But, if you own, I think probably the easiest thing is just identify where do you want internet, and then have somebody, run the lines for you and hardwire it. Because when hardwired lines are running down your hallway, down your stairs, and it's not the most attractive thing because people are tripping over them, or like it's hard to even sweep. You got to sweep around the cords and stuff. It can work until you figure out more of a long-term solution. But I'm all about long-term solutions, because once it's hardwired and you just plug in a room, there's no need for Wi-Fi anymore. And another thing maybe listeners are thinking about is, well, what if I want to connect my iPad? How do I do that? You can only connect Wi-Fi. Well, my daughter has a little iPad, and actually figured out that you can hardwire those too, even though there's not an Ethernet connection on it. So I think it's really, if there's a will, there's a way. And now that EMRs are becoming more known and hopefully even more known with this summit, the information that you're putting out and interviewing the experts here, the more that it's known, the more tools where you can just jump on, YouTube and be like, and that's what I did. Hardwire internet through coax. And then some videos popped up. I watched some. I'm like, is that really going to work? Sure enough, it did,
Yeah. And and I think really it's all about having the motive for most people who haven't made the connection between their health and EMFs. It's about getting the motivation. And getting the motivation is about understanding the problem. And because the science is misleading, stroke confusing, and because similar to what you were saying about Lyme disease, it's very hard to diagnose when you are actually symptomatic around, or perhaps you're not symptomatic, but you're being affected in some way by these exposures, and that is a problem. But yeah, where's the will, there is always a way, isn't there, as you say. The hardwired. And so in terms of your life, perhaps, or let's just finish off with your protocol. Yeah, so you're telling people that are facing chronic disease, or that are experiencing Lyme disease, that have Lyme disease. So you're saying the hardwired, is that where it stops, or what about shielding? You go into that?
Yeah, I mean, EMR needs to be addressed. The more health issues you have, the more you have to deal with it. Just because not everybody senses it or feels it from what they consciously know, doesn't mean it's not negatively affecting us. So if we just assume that it's a stressor, and if we're having health issues, we need to reduce all the stressors we can. We can't live in a bubble, but obviously we want to reduce them. But if you're living next to a cell phone tower, you need to shield your house. You really need to try to protect yourself. If you have a smart meter, on your house, and you can't get it removed, and it's in a location that's near stuff, I would recommend shielding it. We found out in our house in San Diego, when we had it tested, that my daughter's bedroom was the worst. Yeah. And we ended up shielding the circuit breaker box where the smart meter was. And then one day it just hit me. I'm like, okay, we do the EMF paint in the room. We put an extra, G-Flex shield over top of it, and I'm trying to block all this EMF, EMR. I'm like, what if I can just get the smart meter removed? And one phone call later to the San Diego, SDGE, it was a $75 one-time charge, extra $10 a month to read the analog meter, and boom, we had an analog meter. And I was like, oh. But I still left the shield up because there's a circuit breaker box there, that was with all the wiring and stuff, right, pretty close to her bedroom. So we left the shield up to shield that. So I do believe, I'm not an expert in using meters and understanding them. So I like hiring people that come in and they bring them in and they, do their thing with their expertise. And then, shut the Wi-Fi off, shut the Bluetooth off, have somebody come in and measure your house. Cause you might have one of those like triple switches and just the feedback loop is wrong or something. And now anytime it's flipped on, you're getting massive EMFs, it's just, it's things you don't know until somebody, has a meter, or if you're gifted enough to be sensitive to it, you can feel it and know. But if you don't feel it, you really need some way to measure it.
Which is an excellent point. If you're gifted enough, but many people don't, and that's how I started on this journey. Obviously you don't see it as a gift when this happens to you initially, but afterwards you do, and I do anyway. So the
Lloyd,
shift, but really it's
your kryptonite becomes your superpower, and that's exactly what we need to understand. Because my wife, my wife almost died of Lyme disease. I was like, why is this happening? Is my daughter a curse? And then as we're getting through it, I realized, oh my gosh, she's the biggest blessing in the world, because she forced us to dig deep to figure out what were the underlying issues. And it's so easy in turmoil and when you're having health issues to be like, why me? Why me? But when you get through it and you look back, you're like, oh, that's why that was happening. Because, I have a bigger purpose in life.
Exactly. And so we do have a tendency to fall into this victim mentality. Well, then when you kind of stand back, when a year or two or whatever, how long it takes down the line, then that was my take on it also, is, wow, I'm just so lucky. And like you, it gave me a very clear direction. And with you, it was all this great information, which you learned so much, with the Lyme disease and the parasite summits and so on, and the detox and everything. Let's just, so if we can finish on the EMFs. So you, just out of curiosity, so you personally, so I got you going wired and so on. Anything else, cell phones, any advice on that? How you're using these technologies generally? Can you give us some insights on that?
Yeah, so I have a cell phone. And that's the thing. I love technology. Like, I am a technology guy. So when I say, like, we need to go wired and, remove all that stuff, I love technology. So I probably should have said that at the beginning, but so I have a cell phone. I have an iPhone X right now, and I just don't put it in my pocket if it's on. And if I'm going to put it in my pocket, I just flip it to airplane mode, because I don't want extra stress. We know the farther away our phone is, the less stressful it is on our body. There's a proximity thing. The closer it is, right? If you're on a cell phone and you're holding it up to your head, you're increasing heat buildup, you're increasing stress. We know kids are more susceptible because the skull bone is thinner. So, like, anytime I talk on the phone, I'm on speakerphone. I hold it away from me, or I have my headset and I have a ferrite bead on it. That's how I roll, if you will, with my cell phone. So I still have a cell phone, but when I'm calling places, when I'm calling clients, I actually call through Google Voice or Google Hangouts that uses Google Voice on my computer, so that it's all hardwired. So I've got my phone for its convenience and if I need it, but I try not to overuse it because I know that that's just increasing the EMF, EMR. So I've really, and it just takes some time. Like, you're kind of going through your life and you're like, okay, so I do this. How can I change it, or how can I minimize it? And it just sometimes takes time, and that's okay. Like, understand it's a journey. What I understand now And looking back 10 years ago, I didn't know any of this stuff, and I'm sure when I look forward fast forward 10 more years and look back to today, I'm going to, kind of laugh like, oh, I can't believe I was doing that. And I feel like that's where we're at with EMF, EMR is, maybe as we look at history, maybe we're at the point where, just a month ago, doctors were recommending cigarette smoking was good for your health. And that's kind of the relationship I look at EMR. Like, we're just kind of coming into public awareness of like, maybe this actually isn't good for our health to have, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and all this. And when you look at the news, like even this year, it was like at the end of March this year, when SpaceX got approved from the Federal Communication Commission for doing 5G satellites, and you see this stuff come through, you're like, what, like how bad does it have to get before all of a sudden there's like malformed people?
I thought you was going to say a swear word there. WTF.
Yeah. Like how bad's it got to get before we start pushing back on it? And I just don't think we're at that point yet. So things are progressing, unfortunately, in that. But when I look forward, I'm like, I think it's going to be a lawyer smorgasbord, for 5G cell phone towers, 5G satellites. Like, I feel like, and maybe I'm just out in my own little world, but I feel like people's skin's going to start melting off. I mean, like, we're going to run into issues, and it's going to be made public. Like, wait a minute, maybe we actually should have done some testing with this before we just pushed it through, even against petitions and other people trying to say, let's slow this down. Yeah. And I think what's going to happen then is we're going to have lawyers that are going to be, blasting them apart because of it. Now, unfortunately, I think it's going to, take health down, and I feel like it's unfortunately going to take lives down. But I hope that, summits like this we can start, moving that needle faster in the right direction versus, more delaying it.
I think, yeah. And, I think we're kind of back to what you were saying before about your personal situation with your wife and my personal situation. It's these things that most challenges, and that's where we get the real growth. And so that's personal growth. But I think that's where, growth as a society is, unfortunately, we have to go through this. We're going through, we're heading for this 5G episode. It's been rolled out, well, pretty much all over the world, or plans for it all over the world. So yeah, it's kind of it's there, and it's another reason to look at this whole EMF question and say, well, okay, the 5G, there's not a lot you can do about that. If they're going to put antennas on every lamppost, is what they seem to be talking about. There's not a lot we can do about that. We can collectively take an action, sure, but we should. But also it's about what you can do in your personal sphere, and there's so much we can do, and the whole dealing with EMFs in these different ways that you've talked about today is really the starting point, I believe. But yeah, so we're running out of time, so any last comments, suggestions, observations that you'd like to share with the viewers?
Yes. It can be daunting and a little like, well, throw my hands up in the air. I can't do I can't do anything anyways, so I'm just going to throw the towel in. And here's the key point is getting your body to an optimal state of health, clearing parasites out, making sure you're not in a moldy environment, making sure that the EMFs that you can affect, that you minimize those, making sure to detox heavy metals, making sure to clear out the chronic viral infections, chronic bacterial infections like Lyme disease, right? Creating a lifestyle that is more favorable for healing than just like stressful environment that's more, unfortunately, favorable for disease. So if we take those action steps, even if they roll out more of these crazy EMR type things, we're going to be less affected by it because our body's going to be in a healthier state. And unfortunately, people that aren't well are going to be reacting more to it. And that's where I feel like, as that goes more public, then we're going to realize, oh, wow, maybe this isn't the best thing to be, completely wireless, and be a wireless planet like we were hoping to be. And, maybe there is hope, Tesla's original invention of the wireless electricity, maybe that is actually hope, on the EMF, EMR thing. But, in the status where we're at now, we need to worry about the things that we can control and affect, and the things that we can't, you just leave it up to the guy upstairs, and, on you go. And in the end, that's what I think the real message is, because, if you're listening to the news all the time and you actually get real news that, breaks down the EMF, EMR side, it can be a little depressing. It's important to understand what's going on, but it's also important to live your life as if you're going to live for another 100 years, and you're going to impact people, and you're going to play a role in this world, rather than like the doom and gloom. So I love to, have faith that there's somebody taking care of us upstairs, but I also love to take action as if it all relies on me.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Dr. J, thanks so much for being part of this EMF Health Summit. It's been fascinating exchanging with you on this, looking at this chronic disease, Lyme disease aspect of it. And I really love your philosophy, truly. So many thanks. Perhaps you could just remind viewers where they can learn more about what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure to be on this summit. When you emailed me, I was like, I'll absolutely come on. This is such an important topic. So I really appreciate all the work you're doing. I know how much work these are behind the scenes. So, but yeah, the easiest place to go is just my name. It's drjdavidson.com. So doctor is DR, J is JAY, and then Davidson.com. Yeah, that's probably the easiest place, and you can get connected to, microbe formulas. You can connect it to my at-home Lyme disease program there. It's pretty much all there.
Fantastic. So for all of you who joined us today, thanks for being part of this movement. Stay tuned for our next session. My name is Lloyd Borrell. Thank you. Have a great day. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.